This city harbors a notorious criminal gang. Their boss is a man named Michael, who calls himself the Black Robin Hood. But he deals drugs, kidnaps for ransom, and runs a prostitution ring. There's no evil deed he won't do. Many wealthy and powerful people have suffered at his hands. Normally, Michael should have been locked up in jail a long time ago. But he's got these sensitive photos of a royal princess. If these pics ever saw the light of day, the royal family's reputation would be trashed. So, the local government is too scared to make any rash moves. Even when Michael commits a crime and gets arrested, he always ends up walking free without any charges. Having this ultimate trump card made Michael more and more brazen. The higher-ups in the government finally had enough and decided to order MI5 to secretly take care of this. Based on the intel gathered after a period of investigation, it was highly likely that Michael had stashed the compromising photos in safety deposit boxes rented at Lloyd's Bank. The director handed full authority for this covert mission to the man in the suit, Tim. No matter what methods he used, he had to get those sensitive photos back. But the most crucial thing was to keep MI5's hands completely clean of any connection. You're young and ambitious. This is your shot at making a name for yourself. Then Gale, who was in the same department as Tim, kicked off the first phase of the plan. He used a honey trap, successfully infiltrating Michael's family, and eventually gained access to Hakeem, Michael's brother. Gale's infiltration could potentially feed a lot more valuable intel back to MI5. Meanwhile, Tim abused his position at customs to frame his ex-girlfriend, Martine, for possession of flour. Tim did this because he knew Martine was connected to a crew with experience in theft. He wanted Martine to use becoming an informant as leverage, find them, and have them steal the photos from the bank's safe deposit box. After the job was done, they could do whatever they wanted with the other valuables, but the whole plan had to be kept under wraps. Apart from providing the necessary intel, they were on their own for any fallout. The main guy in the heist crew is Terry. He used to be a notorious hoodlum on the streets of London, but after settling down and starting a family, he went straight and was living a simple, stable life. He even opened up a used car dealership and hired a young soon-to-be married couple to help out. At first, he thought he could just chill and make some money to support his family, but in recent years, new energy cars kept starting price wars, which tanked his business, leaving him drowning in debt. Every few days, loan sharks would show up at his shop, demanding their money and causing a scene. So that day, Martine went to see Terry, her ex and also a childhood friend. Martine cut right to the chase and told Terry she had a way for them to get rich. She heard from her boyfriend that the trains running nearby were messing with the alarm system at Lloyd's Bank, so the bank was planning to spend a week replacing it. And during that time, there wouldn't be any alarms at all. Martine then boldly laid out her wicked plan. She wanted to rob the bank, specifically a bunch of private safe deposit boxes in the underground vault. She figured most of the gold, jewels, and whatever else was in there was stuff that couldn't be brought to light anyway. Even if the owners of these boxes discovered their stuff was stolen, they probably wouldn't dare report it to the police. It sounded like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Of course, a job this big needed Terry and his closest buddies. Terry was tempted by the huge potential score, and Martine's terms were sweet enough, but it was also a massive risk. Terry needed some time to think before giving Martine an answer. Then, he got up and left the bar. Martine immediately turned to Tim, who was sitting nearby, to talk about whether Terry would take the bait. But right then, Terry, who'd made up his mind, suddenly came back into the bar. Then he caught sight of Martine whispering with a guy in a suit, and he quietly slipped out. Terry felt like the whole thing was way more complicated than he thought. But because of his relationship with Martine, he believed she wouldn't screw him over. Afterward, Terry shared the bank heist plan with two of his best friends and successfully convinced them to join the operation. One of them was Dave, an adult film actor, and the other was Kevin, a photographer. The next day, they met up at the wedding of Eddie, the younger brother who worked at a car repair shop. Besides celebrating Eddie and Lily tying the knot, the four of them secretly discussed the prep work for the job. Martine had already opened a safe deposit box at Lloyd's Bank. She used the excuse of showing Terry the box to get him into the underground vault and scope things out. Meanwhile, Dave and Kevin were outside the bank, pretending to be tourists, snapping tons of pictures of the bank's exterior. That's when Dave spotted Lou, his former boss. This guy turns out to be a pretty important character later in the story. Lou also had a safe deposit box at Lloyd's bank, but he didn't even recognize Dave, who just said hi to him. Afterward, the four of them used the intel they'd gathered to start planning the next step. Next to the bank was a fried chicken joint, and next to that was a leather goods store that was up for sale. The back of the leather goods store's basement is connected to the building's underground parking lot. They planned to dig a tunnel from the basement of the leather store straight to the bank's vault. After grabbing the loot, they'd drive off through the back of the leather store's basement. That way they wouldn't raise any suspicion. After hashing it out from all angles, they agreed this plan had the best chance of success. Now, they needed to find Bambas, a friend of Terry's who was a whiz with machinery and construction. Terry convinced Bambas to join the crew to handle the tunnel digging, and finally, they brought in a seasoned con man known as the Major. This guy always dressed like a proper gentleman, not only acting refined, but also speaking with a perfect British accent. He didn't look like he had any ties to crime, making him perfect for handling any sticky situations if something unexpected happened. So, finally, Terry had all his crew assembled, but before they got down to business, Terry met his wife at a restaurant for a romantic candlelit dinner. He wanted to tell her that he had to leave the family for a bit. He was drowning in debt and needed to figure out a way to make some money, and fast. He asked Wendy not to pry into the details because he couldn't bear to lie to his family. Right now, all he wanted was for Wendy to take their 2 daughters to stay with relatives for a while until he returned safely. The next day, the 6-man crew officially got to work. The Major took charge of renting the leather goods store and handling any unexpected issues, then used renovations as a cover. He got his hands on the building's blueprints from the planning department and gathered all the necessary construction tools. Terry and the others, posing as a renovation crew, drove a van into the building's underground parking lot and brought all the needed equipment into the basement, and their every move was being closely watched by Tim's people. Tim reported the progress to the director. He planned to wait until Terry and his gang succeeded, and then swoop in to reap the rewards. Specifically, he'd have his people intercept them, completing the mission, and if things went south, he could just cut off contact with Martine, absolutely ensuring MI5 had zero involvement. After Terry and his crew were all set, they started the work. They planned to finish the heist before the bank opened on Monday morning. But as they dug deeper, the loud noise started affecting the fried chicken place's business. The owner then called the cops to complain. In no time, the police showed up at the leather store, knocking on the door. Everyone was scared out of their minds and immediately stopped working. Luckily, the Major stepped up and handled it smoothly, not giving anything away. The cops didn't suspect a thing, just gave them a verbal warning and left. But it was clear they needed someone to keep watch outside. Terry quickly reached out to Eddie, someone he trusted, for help. Eddie wouldn't get a cut, but after it was all over, Terry promised to give him his used car dealership as a reward. Terry told him to find a spot with a wide view on the rooftop of the building across from the bank. He was to monitor the situation around the bank in real time, and if he spotted anything fishy, he had to report it immediately to Terry and the others using a walkie-talkie. That evening, Tim also arrived in the area. He ordered 2 of his guys to watch the entrance and exit of the parking lot, while he temporarily took charge of watching the store himself. Then, Tim deliberately strolled around in front of the leather goods store for a bit. Just then, Eddie reported the situation in time, but it didn't make anyone suspicious. Only Martine guessed that the guy outside was Tim. She made an excuse about going out to buy cigarettes and went to a nearby bar. Using that short window of time, she updated Tim on the latest progress of the operation. But, wouldn't you know it, Terry had followed Martine to the bar. He saw them talking. Seeing this, Tim quickly made his exit. Martine lied to Terry, saying Tim was just some random guy hitting on her. By now, Terry was on high alert, but still didn't expose Martine. He used a moment when Martine stepped away to secretly make a phone call. Meanwhile, Gail was also secretly reporting the situation to Tim. Michael, the gang leader, was about to leave London for Trinidad. He handed over a portion of the illegal business to someone else to manage, and it was none other than that boss Lou, who appeared earlier. Finally, Tim reminded Gail to be careful and protect his safety. As long as they got those photos back, they could bring Michael to justice no matter where he ran off. Back with Terry, after returning from the bar, he continued digging the tunnel. But then, the tunnel suddenly collapsed. Terry fell straight into a big hole. Luckily, he wasn't hurt. The major came to check out the hole and discovered it was a mass grave from the Great Plague of London in 1665. But as luck would have it, this mass grave was right below the bank's vault, which saved them a ton of time. They just punched through the vault floor from above the grave. Finally, Terry went up to check and confirmed it was a vault. But the toxic fumes and dust from the digging made it hard for everyone to breathe, so they had to take a breather. They figured they'd wait for the dust to settle and then start the heist right away. Eddie, who was keeping watch outside, couldn't help but ask about how the job was going. The answer he got was, of course, super positive. Everyone was even chatting excitedly over the walkie-talkie. However, their conversation that night was accidentally picked up by a nearby radio enthusiast. He figured out from what he heard that it was a bank robbery and immediately called the cops. But at first, the police didn't believe him. So he recorded the conversation and called them again. This time, the cops started to take it seriously. However, the listening range of the radio could be up to a 6-mile radius. There were at least a few hundred banks in that area. Unfortunately, the recording didn't mention which bank it was, and besides, Terry and his crew were taking a break, so there was nothing to overhear. At this point, Police Chief Roy assigned one of his officers to stay and continue monitoring the radio, while he headed back to the station to prepare for special action. Meanwhile, Martine, while everyone else was sound asleep, snuck into the bank vault by herself. Based on the clue Tim gave her, she had to find safe deposit box number 118. Suddenly, Terry, who had followed her, said hello, scaring Martine out of her wits. Terry knew in his heart that Martine was hiding something from everyone, but he still didn't expose her. He hoped he could subtly get her to reveal her hidden agenda. But Martine was smart too. Unless she was cornered, she would never tell Terry the truth. In this unique situation, it was rare to be alone together. So why not use a passionate kiss to temporarily end the suspicion between them? Early that morning, the police dispatched a large number of squad cars, splitting into dozens of teams to check each bank, hoping to scare them into communicating over the walkie-talkie. Meanwhile, Terry and his crew, fully rested, were inside the vault, frantically ransacking it. With each safe deposit box they opened, huge amounts of gold, jewelry, and cash were revealed. But Martine was laser-focused on box number 118. However, Terry was one step ahead and got to the contents inside first. He discovered that inside, besides some documents on Michael, there were also compromising photos of Princess Margaret. At this point, Terry finally understood that the truth Martine was hiding was all inside box number 118. This safe deposit box was a huge can of worms that could bring serious trouble. But Terry was already prepared, so he didn't tell the others, avoiding any unnecessary drama. Just then, 2 police cars showed up in front of Lloyd's Bank. Eddie immediately notified everyone on the walkie-talkie. The police officer in charge of monitoring the radio also heard their conversation and reported it to Chief Roy. But almost all the banks in the city had police cars out front at this point, and they still couldn't pinpoint the exact location of the walkie-talkie. Just then, the director of Lloyd's Bank opened up and cooperated with the police, entering the underground vault. When they got the alert, everyone immediately went silent, filled with anxiety. On the manager's side, when he saw the underground vault door was still intact, he didn't think anything was wrong. Plus, to open the vault door, they needed approval from the bank director on Monday morning. So, the director and the police left the bank together. That's when everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but they knew very well they shouldn't stay long. Then, they told Eddie to pull out immediately. But right at that moment, an ambulance showed up in front of the bank, sirens blaring. This was another method of checking a range by the police. Just as Eddie was about to grab the walkie-talkie to inform everyone, he accidentally dropped it off the building. Terry, not getting a response from Eddie, felt something was seriously wrong and quickly packed up their stuff to get out of there immediately. Eddie's mishap saved Terry and the crew. If Eddie had managed to mention the word ambulance, the following events definitely wouldn't have happened. By this point, after not hearing anything further, the cop monitoring the radio ruled out Lloyd's Bank. Then, after Terry and his crew finished packing up, they drove straight out of the underground parking lot. Tim, who had been waiting for a long time, ordered his men to intercept their car immediately. But Tim had fallen for their trick. The car was empty. Turns out, The night before at the bar, Terry had figured out he couldn't trust Martine anymore, so he made a call and hired a driver. After getting word from Terry, the driver took off in the truck to a different location, while Terry and his crew snuck away in another car with the loot they just scored. Later, Terry led everyone to an old warehouse to start counting their haul. Besides a huge amount of gold and jewelry, they also found some compromising photos of high-ranking officials and members of parliament. Then, everyone divided up the loot. After Bamboss and the Major got their shares, they left first. That's when Terry pulled out the compromising photos of the royal princess and confronted Martine about hiding the truth. Dave and Kevin also realized something was seriously off. Finally, Martine was forced to spill the beans about her predicament. Only then did Terry and his two friends learn they had been kept in the dark about the whole plan. Everyone knew MI5 wasn't an organization regular people could mess with. They were even more ruthless than the cops, and trusting them was a death sentence. Dave figured that getting out of Dodge was the most important thing right now, and he left the warehouse alone first. Tim knew he'd been outsmarted by Terry and his crew, but he believed Martine would contact him again. After all, those photos were now a hot potato, and Martine surely didn't want to dig her own grave. The next morning, the underground vault at Lloyd's Bank was authorized to be opened. The bank director was stunned when he saw the ransack scene before him. He immediately called the police, and they quickly sealed off the crime scene. Soon after, all the major newspapers in the city were reporting on the bank robbery. On another front, Martine and Terry called Tim and arranged to meet at the North Iceland train station. Meanwhile, the MI5 director, when he heard the news about the bank robbery spreading like wildfire, felt helpless. Initially, they planned to resolve everything quietly, but now it was all over the city. If the police caught the robbers first, the compromising photos of the royal princess would surely be exposed, and the consequences would be disastrous. So, he ordered his men to use the excuse that the robbery was connected to national security secrets and demanded the police withdraw from investigating the case to control the situation. As news of the bank robbery spread like wildfire, some people immediately freaked out. First was the boss Lou, along with Sonia, his partner behind the scenes, and a corrupt cop on their payroll. Lou and Sonia ran high-end brothels and adult entertainment joints. They also stashed a ledger detailing police bribes in the bank's safe deposit box. Sonia's box, on the other hand, contained a huge stash of compromising photos of members of parliament and high-ranking officials. If their information got out, they were all toast. Lou also informed Michael, who was hiding out abroad. When he got the news, he was instantly on edge. Those compromising photos of the royal princess were his golden ticket to do whatever he wanted. If the government got their hands on them, he could end up dead and buried. But Lou, who had a pretty good relationship with him, promised to help get the royal scandalous photos back. Of course, Lou was more concerned about his stuff. At this point, Michael felt something was off. He started to suspect Gail, Hakeem's woman. Michael was a cold-blooded, ruthless guy, and this time Gail might be in danger. On another front, Terry met Tim at the designated train station. To be safe, Terry only brought a few of the photos of the royal and the members of parliament. He told Tim they needed an official pardon signed by the government and also demanded new passports and exit permits. Only then would he hand over the rest of the photos. Tim immediately reported back to the director. At first, they thought the only major headache was the royal scandalous photos, but now it involved a bunch of high-ranking government officials, and even the director himself was dragged into it. Now, the director couldn't make the call on his own anymore. He had to ask Parliament to issue a national security secrecy notice, known as a D-notice. Mr. Liu was busy discussing countermeasures with the corrupt cop when he suddenly remembered the actor he met in front of the bank a few days ago. Some clown who made adult films kept snapping pictures on the street. The more Liu thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. He then ordered the two corrupt cops to grab Dave, who was about to make a run for it. Under brutal torture, Dave honestly spilled the beans about everything. The two corrupt cops used the information from Dave to track down the others. When they got to Martine's place, they were even chased off by MI5 agents. Finally, they only found Eddie at Terry's car repair shop and straight up kidnapped him. They even left a business card for Eddie's wife, asking her to contact Terry. By now, the news about the Lloyd's Bank robbery had spread to every nook and cranny. of London. The recording of Terry and his crew's conversation from that night was being played over and over again by the police on the radio. Terry's eldest daughter recognized her dad's voice and told her mom. Wendy, who was already worried sick, suddenly got a call from Terry. Terry didn't have time to explain everything. After saying he was okay, he told Wendy and the kids to stay put at home and not go out. After hanging up, he called the repair shop again. Lily, in tears, told Terry about Eddie's kidnapping and gave him the number the corrupt cop had left. Then, Terry called that number. Mr. Liu got straight to the point, directly threatening Terry to hand over the ledger and the royal's scandalous photos in exchange for Eddie's life. For Terry, those compromising photos of the royal were their only bargaining chip for freedom and couldn't be handed over. But they had no idea what ledger Liu was talking about. So, they flat out denied having either of those things over the phone. Seeing Terry wasn't going to be easy, Liu ordered the corrupt cop to shoot Dave dead. Eddie was so scared that he was in tears, desperately hoping Terry could come to his rescue. Finally, Boss Liu gave Terry 1 hour to find the notebook, or else Eddie would lose his life. After hanging up, Terry and Kevin immediately rushed to the truck to look for the notebook. Eventually, they found a notebook with Boss Liu's name on it in the messy pile of mail, detailing the bribe amounts, times, and winning dates of many police officers and high-ranking officials. Now that the notebook had been found, they faced a difficult problem. If they handed the notebook over to Boss Liu, MI5 would not let them off the hook. If they handed over the photos to MI5, even if they got a pardon from the government, Eddie would be killed. Plus, Liu would order a hit on them. But if you looked at it from another angle right now, the things both sides needed were in Terry and his crew's hands, so they held all the cards. Finally, they came up with a plan to play both sides and come out on top. To put the plan into action, Terry contacted Liu, telling him to meet at Paddington Station at 11 a.m. the next day, to exchange the hostage for the goods. Terry told Liu that if he didn't comply, he'd make the bribery evidence public. At worst, it would be mutually assured destruction. What Boss Liu feared most was spending the rest of his life in prison, so he quickly agreed. The first two members who backed out of the robbery, Bam Boss and the Colonel, were each murdered by mysterious figures. Meanwhile, Terry took the photos of the three of them and went to see Tim again. Tim said that Prince Mountbatten was willing to personally handle the matter. Terry also insisted that the deal had to go down at 11 a.m. the next day at Paddington Station. Finally, Terry mentioned that this case had stepped on the toes of some local big shots, leading to people getting killed. He hoped Tim could offer some help, but Tim said their deal was only about handing over the royal photos. They wouldn't get involved in anything else. Michael discovered Gail's identity as a spy. In the end, poor Gail is taken to a farm and brutally killed by Michael. Early the next morning, Terry and his crew started prepping for another step before the trade. They started digging through newspapers, searching for the name of the cop in charge of the bank robbery case. Then, they cross-referenced it with the names in Boss Liu's notebook. Finally, they found out the guy leading the investigation was a police chief named Roy. His name wasn't on the bribe list, meaning Chief Roy wasn't on Boss Liu's payroll. Terry guessed that Roy was probably a pretty straight arrow. Then, he ripped out a page from the notebook and told Kevin to hand-deliver it to Roy. Kevin filled Chief Roy in on the situation, telling him that if he wanted the complete list of corrupt cops, he had to be at Paddington Station at exactly 11 a.m., and that he could also nab the corrupt cop in the process. After arriving at the station, Terry and Martine split up. Tim had gotten to the station early, however. The person meeting with Terry was Prince Mountbatten. Tim had arranged for people to make sure the exchange went smoothly, and even found time to chat with Martine. Meanwhile, Terry headed to the agreed-upon spot to wait. Just then, Liu and the corrupt cop brought Eddie to the scene. As they were about to approach Terry, the corrupt cop spotted the two agents he had encountered at Martine's place the other day and immediately turned and ran towards the back exit of the station. At this point, Terry saw Eddie being taken away and was frantic with worry. Fortunately, right after that, Lord Mountbatten showed up just in time. The two sides quickly completed the trade, and Terry immediately chased after them out the back exit of the station. After catching up to Liu, he beat him to a pulp. Then, the other remaining corrupt cop pulled out a gun and aimed it at Terry. The situation was extremely dangerous. After taking down the corrupt cop, Terry quickly rescued Eddie and stopped the other corrupt cop from escaping. Just then, Chief Roy showed up with his squad and got everyone at the scene under control. Normally, Terry and his crew would be facing the music too, but Tim wasn't heartless enough to just stand by and watch. After all, Terry and his gang had those signed pardons from the prince himself. In the end, Chief Roy let Terry and his crew go, and Terry kept his word, handing over Boss Lou's notebook to Chief Roy. After getting back the royal family's scandalous photos, MI5, now worry-free, went to Michael's place in Trinidad to arrest him. Then, they found Gail's body in a corner of the farm. Finally, Michael was executed in 1975 for multiple crimes. The movie ends there, with the surviving robbers all going their separate ways. Terry's family went on to live a simple, happy life. The value of a movie is in its reputation, and the value of a movie review is in the feeling it gives you. That's it for today's story. Thanks for watching. What did you all think of this movie? Let me know in the comments below.